Hello, I'm Anna Barco and I head up CGMA's innovation work on skills and talent. Today we're very lucky to have with us Shantanu Ghosh, Senior Vice President from Genpact, to discuss some of the key trends from a recent report for CGMAs entitled New Skills, Existing Talents. Welcome, Shantanu. The research that we've done in this area has pointed to finance and finance professionals often taking a broader remit, greater responsibilities, bringing their objectivity and independence to really help drive agile decision making, more effective decision making in the long-term sustainable success of their business. Is this your experience? And what do you think is driving this broadening remit in finance?
So the answer to your question, whether I see this happening, is an unequivocal yes. In fact, the common refrain from most of our clients, if you talk to the business managers, is that they are not getting enough of finance to partner them to make business and strategic decisions. I think finance has come a long way in providing assurance that core bookkeeping, that core reporting, that core regulatory compliance, etc., will get taken care of. That's not to say that everyone has a perfect system, but it'll get taken care of. So therefore the question is, how do you help me run my business better? And the reason why that demand is becoming increasingly high is because the business environment has become incredibly tough. It is uncertain, it changes, and finance is really the only group which understands the entire flow of business, understands the leverage points, understands the pulse points. And therefore, if the finance people cannot play that strategic role, it's a huge opportunity loss for the business, because there is really no other function which can play that role.
Now that is interesting, because what our research found, Shantanu, is that the best performers, the high-performing organisations are already giving their finance function significantly more responsibility and a broader remit, specifically around the areas of management support, the advisory, the partnering roles, if you will. Now, given the current global landscape and the economic volatility, do you expect to see this trend continuing apace?
I think it's an irreversible direction. So I absolutely expect that to continue for all organizations. It is also not surprising that the top performing organizations have made the change first. Part of the reason why they're top performing is because they've embraced new ways of doing business. So if you look at finance, you will find that many of the top performing organizations have managed to leverage alternate capabilities for doing the transactional pieces of finance. Okay, and then they have actually moved up the curve, or using either their own shared service centers or service providers to even do some of the value added parts of finance, which means closing the books, which means doing reporting and stuff, which all has allowed bandwidth to be freed up for their core finance professionals, and then to play a business partnering role. Spend much more time with the front end people, spend much more time with business managers, and therefore add value on that. And I find that that's a trend which is not going to change for anyone.
Now that is interesting, because given that there are such benefits, there are an awful lot of organisations that perhaps haven't done that much yet to really expand the remit of finance. Why do you think that is? Are there barriers?
There are obviously a few barriers, and I think the first and foremost barrier is really the core belief of finance that it performs a control function. And that sense of control and the sense of being in charge of everything actually prevents finance itself to look out and say, what's the new way of doing things? Do I really need to do everything, or there are stuff which I can find different ways of working through? The second, in case of many global organizations, is that their operating model, system landscape, complexity of business is obviously very, very high and diverse. And sometimes people fall into the trap of saying that unless I solve all of that, I really cannot move onto a different journey of how do I release bandwidth, how do I think of doing it in a different manner. And our advice to clients always is that it's not a sequential process. You can do both in parallel. There are many different ways it can be done. There are many organizations which have gone through similar transformation journeys or roadmaps, and there are many things to learn from such experience. So those are the two important barriers. The third barrier is that it is also a little bit of a threatening to finance people. While everyone likes to do business partnering, it needs a certain set of skills. It needs a certain ability and business acumen to be good at it. Whereas many finance people are trained to really work on data and work on analysis and work on reporting. So it's a little bit even personally threatening for certain finance people whether they can make that leap and make that change. And those three barriers create the reluctance or create the lack of speed of adoption for many organizations.
If we continue in that vein of the skills required, you mentioned the business, the commercial acumen that really the business partnering element require. Going forward, for finance to really take on that broader remit, is it really the managerial and the business acumen, or are there wider skills that are required to be really effective?
Actually, that's a very interesting question because, I have a personal view that we need to redefine the kind of technical skill sets that finance professionals need. I think in the past, all of us have thought that finance technical skill sets means you know how to interpret GAAP, you know how to do variance analysis, and you know how to do treasury activities, or you know how to read regulations. And while all of that, those continue to be very important, to my mind, they have now become almost basic needs. I think the emerging needs are about how do you manage risk in a multivariate environment when it's a systemic risk issue and you're not dealing with discrete risk. How do you create flexible operating structures and models, and what does that flexibility mean from a operating leverage perspective, which is different from financial leverage, which finance people understand. How do you deal with uncertainty, and therefore how do you deal with game theory, how do you deal with scenario building, how do you deal with creating option models for investments. And these are kind of skill sets, and these are kind of techniques and technical acumen that finance people will have to start getting trained on, because the need for the hour is to combine this with their core skill sets of being technically very, very sound from an accounting and regulation perspective, which is what with the core technical. So the answer to your question, is it only about business acumen? The answer is no, it's not only about business acumen. It's also about some of the add-on technical skills, which are a little different from what has been there in the past.
So on that note, I'd like to thank you, Shantanu, for sharing your time, and to Genpact for supporting our continued work and research in this area. If you would like to download the new CGMA report, New Skills, Existing Talent, simply visit the website that's appearing on your screen now. Many thanks.